Hello, this is Dr. Williams, and this is a tutorial on how to edit your work. No one is more surprised than me to be starting this with a picture of Justin Bieber, particularly one of him in his underwear, but do go with me on this analogy. This now infamous picture of Justin Bieber, I think, is a really good metaphor for what editing a piece of work entails. So this hit the headlines because of the clear improvements that were made in some areas of this. So, for example, some things are much more defined now. So my knowledge of Photoshop and filters, I must admit, is quite sparing. But I can see that the contrasts here have been really ramped up to make them look very nice and chiseled and defined, which is what we're all looking for when we're in our underwear. And I think that is one of the key things that we're looking for in an essay. We're looking for precision, we're looking for picking out the best details and maybe making those big contrasts between things, or maybe having a really kind of clear line of argument. So lots of definition. It also hit the headlines because certain parts had been enlarged. Of course, I'm talking about his bicep and shoulder muscles here. And it might be that when you go back to edit your work, you realize that the real kind of gem of your work has been kind of lost in amongst the word count. And there's one bit that's particularly good that you really need to enlarge and spend a little bit of time unpacking. Already regretting that use of word, but there it is. So editing again is about enlarging the best bits and maybe minimizing the bits that aren't working for you. I'm going to leave that analogy there before it gets even more risky. So moving on. While you watch this video, I think probably the way you're going to get the most out of it is if you draw up a list of questions, a flow chart, or maybe a checklist that you could edit any essay from. So when I thought about how I was going to do this video today, I thought I would probably show you an essay and edit it as I went. But I've actually admittedly already done that, and it's on our YouTube channel, and it's hyperlinked at the end of this lesson, so you can go and look at that at any time at your leisure. So what I'm about to present you with is basically a process that you can apply to absolutely any essay. So it will really help you with literature, but it'll also help you with anything in sixth form and even beyond. So even when you're at university, you can look back at poor Dr. Williams warbling on, telling you how step by step to edit your essay. And so this quote in particular, I think is really important, that you should write without fear and edit without mercy. So you should write everything that you think is interesting, everything that you think might be relevant. You should explore as you write, but then you should really edit very forcefully, as if you are a teacher, as if you are being hypercritical. So be generous to yourself in your writing stage and be very hard on yourself in your editing stage. The secret to editing your work is simple. You need to become its reader instead of its writer. And this is perhaps no more true than when you are submitting an essay for somebody else to examine and give you marks on. You need to understand what lens they're going to read that essay through. So rather than just you being really nice to yourself and being like, hey, that was a really good idea, well done, that was dead interesting, you need to really understand what that reader is going to look for and how readable your work is. So I'm going to be giving you some tips on that today. So, Harry Heckel says that most of writing is editing. It's the responsibility of the author to provide the reader with the best material possible. And that last bit of this quote is so salient, that you can't be precious about including all your ideas and commending yourself for having had such a kind of number of them. You really need to fine tune and pick the best details. So, as I say, enlarge the best part and cut out anything that you don't need. Photoshop out those bits. And this is my final quote, I promise, from Stanley Kubrick, who says, and I must admit I am on the same page as him, I love editing. I think I like it more than any other phase of filmmaking. If I wanted to be frivolous, I might say that everything that precedes editing is merely a way of producing film to edit. And I think I might be speaking out of turn here, but for a lot of English students, or for a lot of students who do the humanities and who are more inclined towards essay writing disciplines, it's really quite engaging and quite fun and quite challenging to think about, how do I perfect this piece of work? Yes, I've got loads of ideas and I'm really clever for coming up with them, but what is the biggest kind of challenge, particularly in literature when we think of assessment objective 1, is how do I best communicate that? And that's the skill really that we need to kind of hone now, because what's going to see us through our lives is going to see us through our A levels, our degrees, but also any job, And just, being a kind of human of the world, participating in society, if you can communicate something really well, if you can make something really impactful rather than just kind of splurge it out either on the page or from your mouth like I'm currently doing, then you'll be, respected and listened to, and it'll kind of travel further. So what do you need before you can edit? So I basically thought of this little checklist point as what do you need to kind of stock up on and put in your basket before you can begin to fine tune this essay that you've managed to get onto the paper. Firstly, you're going to need time to read the whole thing in one go. And when I say in one go, I mean at least once through. So my best advice I can give you in terms of editing is first and foremost, plan to finish writing your essay early. And that goes for whether you're doing it in an exam or whether you're doing it at home and you've got deadlines. Set your own deadlines. So if you're in an exam hall and you know roughly you've got an hour to write each essay, write down on your paper what time you should be finishing each essay and then take off 5 minutes so that you've got time to go back and fine tune it. If you've been set a deadline for work, maybe for your NEA, work backwards from that deadline and set your own mini deadlines. Time to read the whole thing in one go is so important because you need to understand how it hangs together as a whole. You, particularly for AO1, are being marked on your cohesion, your cohesiveness. How well does it flow as one continuous argument? And so if you can only do it in little bits, you're not going to be sure of that. The second thing you might need is some privacy to concentrate, so not somewhere where you're going to get distracted. So by all means do it in school, but it might be that you need your headphones on, or you might need to do it in a lesson where none of your friends are free. But also you might want to do it at home because reading aloud is one of the most valuable things you can do. This is something that I still do with my work to check that it makes sense, because there are certain things that you think you see on the screen when you don't read aloud that when you come to read aloud you realise aren't there. So you might have missed certain words, certain bits of punctuation. You might realise that a sentence is unbearably long and you'll run out of breath. But reading out loud is really important. If that is something that you are going to struggle with, you might want to use the read aloud function of Word, which will just read back what you've written to you. So that's what my husband uses all the time because he can't be bothered to read his own work. On kind of the same level, you might actually want a second pair of eyes. So you might want to read it aloud to somebody else, or you might just want somebody else to cast an eye over it and give you a few pointers, or just kind of write in the margin, what are you talking about here? I can't follow your argument. Number 4, a clear success criteria. So when you come to edit, you need to know what it is that you're looking for. So if that is for a particular subject, you'll need to know the assessment objectives that you're being examined on. You need to know what the mark scheme is going to give you some marks for. So you might want that in front of you. It might be that you need some feedback. So it might be that your teacher's looked at a draft, or it might be that you keep getting the same feedback and you need to bear that target in mind. You might have a checklist, so you might have something that you've made from this video, for example, or you might have certain questions that you apply to every essay just to check that it makes sense. It might even just be as simple as, I need to know how many words this is or how long it is and check that it's within that remit. The final thing that you might find useful is a hard copy. I cannot edit things on a screen nearly as well as I can edit them with a pen in my hand and scribble all over things, draw arrows and highlight patterns and that kind of thing. I really need a hard copy in front of me and I can't recommend that enough. Possibly not the best for the planet, but we can recycle it, worry about that later. But I think it gives you a kind of extra layer of distance so that you can read it more accurately. Oh, wasn't the final one, number 6. Somewhere to save your cuts is very important. So whenever I cut anything from an essay at all, I always save it in a separate Word document in case, for example, I take myself below the word count accidentally, or in case I think, oh, actually that quote would have fit really well in this paragraph and I'll just find that little bit and kind of put it back in rather than kind of do it all from scratch again. So a lot of the editing process is going to be cutting the wheat from the chaff. Make sure that you save something in case it turns to gold later. So the next thing I want to advise on is when you should edit. You should edit at a significant milestone. So it might just be that you've written a really good paragraph and you want to edit that paragraph in its entirety, or it might be that you have written your thesis statement almost, just your argument on a tiny kind of micro level. It might be that the essay is finally finished and you've got a full draft. It might be that you finally reached the word count. But basically what I'm saying here is don't bother drafting something that's half finished that you know you're going to go back and add to because you're just wasting your time. Get everything out on the paper and then go back and refine. You should definitely edit after a break. This is where this image comes in and not being able to see the wood from the trees. If you are too close to your work, if you believe you know what it says rather than actually reading what it says, then you're not going to be at your best in terms of your editing. So that's why it's so important to finish early and give yourself some time away from it so that when you come back, you're looking at it with fresh eyes. When you've received feedback might be a good time, so when someone's actually given you something to look for, or when you've had a brainwave or found further research that could improve your work. So again, another benefit of finishing something early is that if you do find something that would really improve your work, you've got the time to add it in. So basically, you need to think of this editing process as going from macro to micro. So really, really zooming in. So we're going to take it from what does the whole essay look like, then zooming into what does each paragraph look like, into a sentence, word, and punctuation level. So we're going to get kind of continuously finicky, if you will. So I'll take you through each stage. So on this macro level, essay, we're thinking about the structure. So you need to check that your introduction and your conclusion match. It'll be most often in an exam where you might have changed your mind halfway through if you're debating something, that you might find that your argument has kind of switched lanes a little bit by the end. That's fine, but in that last 5 minutes, you can go back and make sure that your introduction flags that so that it doesn't take us by surprise and it looks planned. Those essays are not meant to look like beautiful handwritten masterpieces. They're meant to look like thinking on the page, so don't be nervous about it looking messy and going back and scribbling things out. Next, you should check that your paragraphs come in the best possible order. So do they make a logical conclusion? Are you flitting back and forward from different arguments if you are debating, or are you just doing all of A and then all of B? Check that they flow from one to the other. So if you have changed the order, make sure that you are nodding to what you've just discussed and then introducing your new topic. If you've signposted your paragraphs in your introduction, then make sure the order that you say you're going to raise these points corresponds to the order of the paragraphs. So I just want to show you what I did with one of my essays. Can't actually believe I did this. 50 paragraphs, I think. I basically could not, as I say, get my head around on a screen how something that long should be ordered, and I knew it wasn't quite right. And in the end, I actually had to literally cut and paste it. So I put it all out on the floor. I gave them all letters, and then I decided what order those paragraphs should come in. But what I also did was rate my paragraphs and kind of give them, I don't know, like a mark out of 5 or 10 as to how good they were, because I knew that if I was going to have to be under the word count, then I would find it quite easy just to take out the lowest rated paragraphs and not waste my time refining those paragraphs, only to find that they weren't going to make the final cut anyway. So don't be afraid to mess around with the structure and draw big arrows in your exam if you need to. So speaking of paragraphs, you should lead on from the previous one. You should begin with a clear topic sentence linking to the question or your argument. They often develop from micro to macro, so the other way around to this editing process. So from close reading, short quotes, words, language, to big methods and big ideas, so kind of zooming out, if you will, in paragraphs. I'd like you to be brutal when you come to your paragraphs. You need to test every single sentence or phrase against your topic sentence. Does it actually correspond to that argument? So at the end of every sentence, you should ask yourself, so what? Does that matter? Has that proved my argument? And if the answer is no, then you either really need to edit that phrase or that sentence, or you can just afford to cut it. Try and keep an eye on the length of paragraphs. One way of avoiding an overly long paragraph might be to make sure that you're not repeating yourself. And always end with a return to your argument, usually with a focus on the writer's intention. So summing up what you've said and basically why the writer has done that. Anybody who's been in my lessons will be tired, I'm sure, of me banging on about an argument burger. So basically you start with the what, where you answer the question, then you fill it up with juicy details on the how, lots of evidence and techniques and lots of variation here, and you end on the why. What's the writer's message? What context would give rise to that message? The reason that I like the argument burger analogy is that it's got this kind of bread bun, this like sandwich effect, where the argument should be at the beginning and the end. So I'm always going back to my students and asking them to check their bread buns, if you will, to check that they are answering the question at the top and bottom of each paragraph. I'm going to pause here so that we can change the voiceover into a new hyperlink.